right, thank you for staying with Daybreak. You're just in time for a conversation around the budget, which is looming. It's going to be read out tomorrow. CS for Treasury will be in Parliament to read out the budget. With me in studio experts and also politicians as well. Dr. Makali Mulu, member of Budget and Appropriations Committee, and also MP for Kitui Central is here. Honorable Jude Njomo is also here, member Finance and National Planning, and also MP for Kiambu. Reginald Katzutu, CEO, Amana Capital, is joining us online from London, and Joy Kiru, lecturer and economist, is also with us here in studio. Joy, I'll start with you on this one. The Standard is calling this a painful budget. It's 3.3 trillion. Last year it was also 3.3 trillion. Are we still living beyond our means? Have we learned anything? How do we ensure that this budget is even financed to begin with?
This is one interesting budget in a way that Kenyans know what they want from the budget. But the budget is so elusive whether it can really achieve the desires of Kenyans for several reasons. First and foremost, it's coming at a very interesting time when we are not yet out of COVID, but we seem to be making progress, but it's not known if another strain will come and take us back, but we're hoping we are progressing and getting out. Secondly, it's coming when the cost of living is high. Inflation has hit food and non-food items at the same time. So anybody, even those who don't feel inflation which comes, now everybody, even the rich, are feeling it. Yeah. Because it's both food and non-food. And thirdly, it's coming when there is drought. But most interestingly, it's a budget done by one regime to be implemented by the other. So even what it promises, we are not quite sure if the other person who comes to implement it will look at it the same way. So it's a very interesting budget, to be honest. Yeah,
but do you think we're still living beyond our means, even putting it?
Yes, we are living beyond our means. First and foremost, as we speak today, Trevor, we are expecting that the debt repayment is going to be at about 1.34 trillion, crossing the 70% mark of the revenue collected. Mm-hmm. Tell me, Trevor, we are already borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and we're also borrowing to fund recurrent expenditures. How worse can it really get for anybody in debt? Yeah.
So in your view, this should have been cut into almost half then, but then if that happens, what are the solutions?
A lenient, we can talk about, it's not about cutting the budget into a half, but it's about scrutinizing the budget in terms of efficiency for money and reevaluating our development projects. Because the truth is, if we gave somebody a wish list, everyone would want an airstrip next to them. Everyone would want several of Mombasa roads crisscrossing the whole of Kenya. Everybody would want this. But the question is, can we deliver that? Can we reevaluate this? Not to create ghost projects, no. Everything must be completed, but reevaluate priority projects. What should we complete within what time? I mean, such kind of re-evaluation. And also check, what are we wasting on? Because there's a lot of wastage. We are going to be seeing new faces in government. Probably new fleets of cars. Probably new office decors and new whatever. Is that necessary? And secondly, when you're employing at the county, are we employing because we promise people jobs, or are we employing because we've got work for those people to do? Is every workforce productive? Is there other ways we can generate employment without necessarily taking people to give them a salary and do nothing? So those are things that need to be reevaluated, and those are things that can be used to bring the budget down. Yes.
Reginald, with the economy that we are in, should we be talking about a 3.3 trillion budget at this time?
Yes, Trevor, unfortunately, next year we'll be talking about a bigger one if we actually do not solve the problems that the economy has. Why do I say so? When you persistently, when Jubilee government came into power, persistently had a deficit of 40% between revenue and expenditure. Leave this budget deficit to GDP, they tell us, but revenue to expenditure has been persistently average around 40% from 2013 and until up to actually now. That means every year you are digging a hole that you have to fill up. So the impact of what you are seeing now is the effect of what happened between 2013 and 2017. Yeah, debt repayment in this budget. Professor has already said it. It's around 1.3. Interest alone is 867 billion, because that's what you will see being presented. They will not show you the principal repayments. If you add principal, then it comes to 1.3, 1.4 trillion. That amount is equivalent to what is given to counties, what the government used to pay salaries, combined together. Yeah. So this budget is a result of, one, over borrowing, two, borrowing pointlessly, and you'll find if we do not sit down, and I've been hearing the campaigns and everyone, and I'm wondering who is actually coming up with a plan to sort out the debt problem. Because if you do not set up the debt problem, you will actually not have money to do any of the things that they're actually promising. Because when we go into next year, that debt reservice itself, in terms of interest, is going to go close to $1 trillion. Interest itself, without even putting principal repayment. So yes, you'll expect to have a 3.3 trillion budget. Not because it's going to actually stimulate the economy, but it's actually going to sort out problems that were created before this budgeting time. Okay. Can it be a smaller budget? If you remove the debt element, you realize what we actually pay in terms of wages, transfer to counties, and other things does not even reach or pass $1 trillion shillings. So that means with the revenue we collect of 2 trillion, this year projected at 2.3 trillion, we should actually be able to live within our means. And how, Trevor? Yeah. Now, everything is still being collected centrally by the central government, then disbursed to counties. Yeah, which makes counties not effective, because what we actually devolve to counties is expenditure. Yeah. We have devolved the payroll and not real development, and you realize then there is no development that keeps on coming up from the counties. I would propose, as radical as it might sound, is that national government collects income tax, county governments should collect VAT and excess duty. Then the national government can give a stabilization or equalization fund to counties which are still coming up, like the northern counties. That will put incentives on governors to grow their counties, to grow businesses in their counties, create employment, and we will actually now seeing devolution work. But devolution is not going to work as long as their money keeps on coming from the central government. Development projects are initiated from central government, at inflated prices, treating symptoms and actually not treating real problems. Okay. The expressway is treating a symptom of traffic. And we are saying we need an expressway to treat the symptom of traffic. But what has caused traffic in Nairobi is because we've killed the rural economy, and everyone is migrating from the rural areas to come to Nairobi because that's the only place they can find a job. So you create an expressway, but you're not treating the problem of a dying rural economy or a dying agricultural economy. So yeah. Yes, this budget is going to continue going up each year. I call it aimless budget, because if you look at it, read it, you actually don't know what they're trying to do, what they're actually trying to solve, what they're trying to set up for the future, Trevor. All
right, let me bring in Mulu on this. And you're a member of the Budget and Appropriations Committee. What is the thinking behind this budget? And is it practical?
You know, Trevor, I think we need to separate theories of budget from reality of budget. When I listen to the scholars, I hear a lot of theories being applied. But when it comes to reality, you know, what is happening, Trevor, is when you look at the papers today, the poverty levels in this country are getting worse. Things are becoming more poorer. Why are they becoming more poorer? They're becoming more poorer because they don't have the basics. They don't have access to good health. They don't have access to good education. They don't have access to good roads and all what you can mention. Now the question is, how do you achieve that if you have no budget? You can't achieve. The second important point you must know, Trevor, and this is the right time to discuss the budget. Now, when you listen to all our presidential aspirants, they are making serious promises to Kenyans. You listen to Kenya Kwanza, serious promises. You listen to Asmio side, serious promises. And Kenyans are clapping all over, being excited about this. So what happens? Come August, and one of them is declared the presidential candidate. They have an obligation to fulfill their promises. So the question is, whose budget are we discussing? Are we discussing the budget of the current sitting president or the budget of the coming president? Obviously, the budget we are doing today is not for Uhuru Kenyatta, President Uhuru Kenyatta. It's for the next president of the Republic of Kenya. So when that person comes with all these promises, and they will be now doing their first term, meaning there will be need for another second term, there will be a lot of reorganization of this budget so that they implement what they have promised.
Yeah.
Now, in the process, that's where now the whole issue of how do you finance your budget coming. And I've said many times, the problem we're having, and that's why I wish the scholars would be filling this gap. Us who are politicians, we are very good at saying, I will do. But none of us is talking about how do you finance those things you're talking about.
Okay.
I wish now Madam Uhuru would be telling us the promise by Honorable Mola Odinga of 6,000 shillings to every Kenyan will translate to this kind of trillions or billions in 5 years. So that now we start seeing the gap we are creating. But what is happening, Trevor? For me, I think really the budget will continue having this deficit because the challenge we're having, Trevor, the budget has two components. You have a recurrent budget and a development budget. It is development which grows the economy. It's not the recurrent budget. The recurrent budget is salaries and those things we are all talking about. Now, in a situation where we are funding all our development budget through borrowing, what do you expect? We will continue borrowing because schools are required where we represent. Personally, where I come from, I need more schools, I need better classrooms. Health centers are required where we all come from, me and Jom, and we represent the people. We are with them every day. So what is going to happen is, and I think this is now what we should be discussing, how do we grow this pie called the national cake? There are two ways. One, you can grow it by ensuring that it grows. For it to grow, you need to implement development projects. The second thing is cost cutting, and I like what Madam Kiru was saying. You know, cost cutting is the issues of efficiency. Where can you reduce cost so that we release more resources from the recurrent side of the budget to development? That is what is not happening. You could hear mention about the issue of the counties, where we are employing all our relatives, we are giving them jobs without caring where the salary comes from. At the same time, counties have stopped collecting revenue. If you look at the local authorities before the counties.
Have they stopped or is it being siphoned in a different way?
You see, if you look at the local authorities, Trevor, the predecessor to counties, take an example and just do a quick analysis. You realize that local authorities used to collect more money than what the counties are collecting today. What has happened, they have forgotten that they can generate their own revenue to boost their economies, and they are all focusing on the exchequer, so that they get the money from Nairobi to where they are. And then when they get that from the exchequer, because they have not put efforts to generate it, then the issues of misapplication, the issues of corruption comes in. So to me, I think the budget will continue increasing, but what is critical is the efficient use of the budget and ensuring that we have a targeted budget so that we put more resources to development, which will grow the cake and reduce our recurrent, where we can save. Let's save so that we have more money go to development.
Honorable Njomo, you are also a member of the Finance and National Planning, and as we are calling it, Reginald is calling this an aimless budget. What is it that Kenyans don't understand? How are we going to finance this budget? Over time, yes, you're with them.
And I want to agree with what he has said, that we have to have development in our country. Because we are now crying about high prices, we are talking about high budget. If you close your eyes now and imagine that we stop development because we don't want to have a big budget and we just concentrate on recurrent expenses, then we can lower our budget. But you can tell me the kind of outcry that we are going to have from our population. They want good roads. They want their schools to be done. They want medical facilities. There are so many needs for our people, and they must be done. So if we do not borrow, if we do not do development, then we shall have an outcry on the other side. So we must have a very well-balanced equation on this, where we provide the needs of our people. If you ask me today, we are suffering because of the road at Pangani underpass. It's struggling. All the roads from Thika, Kiambu, and that area. We would like that thing addressed. Now, it have to be addressed, those millions of shillings to be used there. We need that money to be spent. So as much as we would not like our budget to look big, our needs are forcing us to do this. But we must do it in such a way that we are also not putting our country to risk where we are not able to pay our debts. But like Bora Makari have said, we must look also at ways of two things. First, generating our revenue, and two, sealing all the holes where our money is getting lost. If we look at the counties, like you have said, we need to put systems in place where counties are generating their own money and they are not losing money, because we are losing a lot of money in counties. Two, how else can our government generate more money? I am very happy as we speak, because there is a bill that I proposed in Parliament, and that bill was signed yesterday by the President into a law. It's called the National Industrial Training Authority bill. Now it is an act, which puts a system in place where the government will be collecting money from employers and creating a fund that will be used to educate and to train our people in colleges, because our students in primary schools, secondary schools have their own way, their education is catered for by the government. When they go to university, the students are borrowing from help. But we forgot about our college students, and that is why everybody wants to go to university and get a degree, and we're having very few going to colleges. Now, instead of letting the government do it, this bill just enhances a system that was put in place where employers are supposed to help in educating their own staff and those staff that they want to employ. Now that we have removed it from the hands of government and put it now to the hands of employers, what else can we do to help government also, so that the government does not spend directly but uses other agents to fund the same? I think the time has come when we have to think out of the box and think of other ways of funding our budget or reducing our budget without necessarily involving Treasury. Okay.
Reginald, how do we fund this budget from an economist perspective, and how do we deal with the deficit?
How do we
fund this budget and deal with the deficit also?
Okay. Just to answer the honourable MPs in terms of us being theoretical, if you look at the budget for last year, for 2021-2022, development was 623 billion, what was budgeted. Wages were 526 billion, and county was 460 billion. Yeah. If you add those three up, gives you around 1.6, 1.7 trillion. Revenue collected was 2 trillion. So we cannot say we have to borrow to actually fund our development. Yeah, because number one, development does not necessarily mean building a road or a railway. Infrastructure is good for facilitating, but again, it should not be aimless infrastructure, which is actually not helping anything. So if you take the main three things from the budget right now, and they're around 1.6, 1.7, even put it at 2 trillion, we can actually have a balanced budget every year. If we have what I call a budget that is actually focused on fixing the problems that we have in the economy. Why do I call it an aimless budget? 21%, 25% of the GDP directly comes from agriculture. Indirectly, you're looking at 50% of GDP comes from agriculture. If you then go to the budget, the percentage of allocation to agriculture was 3.1% last year. This year, it has gone down to 2.9. Next year, they are projecting that it will be below 2.6. And I call it aimless because you continue killing your bread basket, you continue killing your productive side of the economy in the name of we want to be manufacturing. But your manufacturing, the current manufacturing we have in the country is agro-processing. But if you see, we are not investing in that whole value chain of the agricultural sector. We are not investing in the agricultural sector, which employs 70% of the people that are employed in this country are employed there. And most counties are actually in that agricultural space. So it is not theory, it is literally policy. You start wondering, do we have development economists seated at Treasury? seated at Parliament, seated in the executive, to actually say, guys, this is the structure of the Kenyan economy. If we are going to move from point A to point B, these are the things that we need to start doing. And we cannot do all of them in one budget cycle. So you don't have to borrow trillions to try and build a rail, a road, irrigation, everything in one budget cycle. You have to now do things progressively, having key performance indicators. If we have done this, we have moved to this point, we move into phase 2 going forward. So I don't think funding our budget is a problem, Trevor. We are collecting 2 trillion in taxes. Yeah, this year they're planning 2.3 trillion in taxes. Yeah, so funding our budget is actually not the problem. Having an aimless budget is a problem because now we have a 3.3 trillion budget this year. Of that 3.3 trillion, 1.3 to 1.4 is literally going to service debt. That means it's an unproductive part of the budget because that money is not going to any development. It's going to pay for, quote in quotes, the development that happened in the last 5 years, which we know that literally was just 2 things, a road and a rail, and the last connection mile of electricity and stuff like that. So our problem is on policy. Our problem is not on funding the budget. We are able, that KRA is actually doing a good job. We have sufficient tax structures in the country so that they are actually truly progressive and try to capture the larger informal sector somehow, somewhere. We actually have enough revenue capacity to grow Kenya's economy at a steady pace with very minimal debt. So this story of that we need to borrow to grow is a lie. We actually don't need to borrow to grow. So we don't have a funding problem, Trevor, simply put. We literally just currently, the main problem crisis we have is a debt problem. The next crisis we have is, I think our policymakers don't understand the structure of the economy, which is 80% informal, 70% of the people are employed in the agricultural sector. The agricultural sector, direct and indirect, controls close to 50 to 60% of output. But when you go to the budget, it is the least funded sector. Then all these problems start having a ripple effect going back to their unemployment, food shortages. Like now, we are praying for rain to come so that we can avert a drought. And I'm thinking, we've been having droughts for the last 60 years in our independence. What have we done to make sure that we know we're going to have a drought? We know that we suffer from droughts. Have we improved our irrigation since independence to now? At fast pace, is it growing? For us to be able to avert that, have we improved our grain reserves to be able to avert such things? But simply we just do budget because, well, it is in the constitution, there's a timetable that has to be followed. But what are we really trying to achieve with it? I will challenge you, read the last 3, 4, 5 budgets, and actually, apart from what the PS is writing, the CS is writing stories, really look at the figures and ask yourself, what are they actually trying to do with this budget? Go to the budget books that tell you how much is going to recurring, how much is going to develop for each sector and what KPIs they're trying to achieve. You will actually end up with the conclusion of this is literally an aimless budget.
Okay. Joy, is that your argument as well? I know Kanzuru can be very hard-hitting.
Yes. What I'm saying is this is a budget that's going to be difficult to implement. I don't want to call it names.
Yeah.
But clearly it's going to be a very difficult budget to implement, first and foremost, unless the person coming to power is going to surrender all these big... Of course they have to, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Let them say whatever they want to say out there. Kenyans will clap the match they want. But when they come to the office and they find that even come into the office like this, they don't even have money to pay the salaries, which they must pay, leave alone start looking for monies now to pay, I don't know, 6,000 for every poor person. I don't know, still give money to the youth. I don't know, do what. Even before you do that, realize that pesa mshahara hakuna. You start from there. And as you think what to do, the syndicated loans are due, the commercial loans are due. And those ones you can't do anything, eh?
Yes.
Those ones you just have to pay. And as you start wondering what to do now with these subsidies of yours, the guys who run this country, the fuel guys are downing their tools. Then you realize, really, I have to make the hard decisions. And Kenyans must be ready to have, the person who is going to come is going to be forced by circumstances to run a leaner budget. And they always do it. Look, counties have not been paid. And where are we now at the end of the financial year? and so many people, and then the bills which are pending, which have not been paid.
Yeah.
Why? Because there's no money. And you don't want to run a government whereby you are always held at ransom by people you owe money. And of course, you cannot afford not to pay your debt for international debt and things like that. It's going to be tough.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Let's face it, in terms of, from a realistic and an economist perspective,
yes,
should Kenyans expect more taxes if we are to manage this sort of budget?
Kenyans should not expect any less taxes.
Okay.
They shouldn't expect any less taxes. It's not going to, at least that one we can promise Kenyans, that in terms of taxation, it's not going to get any easier.
Okay.
That is the minimum they can expect.
Okay.
Yes.
Mulu, is that the thinking as well?
You know, there is something we have not talked about, Trevor, in this budget.
Yeah.
When you look at the deficit, the projected deficit in this budget is 870 billion.
Yeah.
That's what the government is projected to borrow in the course of implementing this budget. And that is divided into two. We have the domestic borrowing and then external borrowing. And the reality of the matter is, if anything, we can only expect to sustain the taxes we have today, but not less. Okay. Because for this budget to be implemented automatically, then we must raise the funds. I know there's another important thing we raised, Trevor, which is even going to make it worse. You remember in our approval of the budget policy statement, it was a conditional one. Conditional that we only allowed the government, the executive, to borrow up to 9 trillion, which is allowed by law. And that gives them only a borrowing room of about 400 billion. So even as we are discussing, there's about 47 billion, which they can't borrow because the law is, unless we change the law. So I can see situations where whoever is going to take over will have to really work very hard to get some of this, because you must work very hard to get the law passed by Parliament, so that either change the ceiling of the borrowing so that you borrow more. If not so, reorganize the whole of this budget so that you come to where you are supposed to be. Okay. And we've not received the annual estimates. We're expecting them tomorrow, as you are aware. This has been a unique year. We are not doing things a normal way. I would be very interested to see how have they factored that gap of 470 billion, which they can't borrow. Is it that by proposing additional tax, or is it by proposing reduction of cost in some areas, like what Madam Kiro was saying, so that because you can do away with some of the things we spend money on, really we can do without and still survive. Yeah. So to me, I want to see a very innovative way of doing the annual estimates so that we still maintain a ceiling of 9 trillion for purpose of borrowing. Yeah. But I can tell Kenyans they must be prepared for tough times. It's not going to be easy.
Is that your argument as well, Jomo? Because there seems to be an agreement here that it's going to be tough times. Even as it is right now, Kenyans are overburdened. The cost of living is quite high. You're saying there's no chance that the taxation will go lower. In fact, there's a higher chance that it will go higher. Because
it's very sad, because right now people are really feeling the pinch on taxation and on cost of living. It is very, very high. And this is not unique to our country. We are going through a very bad, a very difficult time. We have just come out of the COVID situation that we were in. The war in Ukraine has messed up with many world economies. Remember, we also had in our country and many African countries the locusts invasion. So all these have really affected our country. But I remember when President Kibaki was elected into office, the first thing he did was to bring efficiency in collecting of revenue from the people. And I remember the first thing he did was to declare a moratorium where if I was not paying taxes, can I go and start paying tax? Forget about what I did not pay in the past. So I think we also need to come up with innovative ways of collecting money. There are people who do not pay their taxes. There are many people who do not pay taxes. How are we going to get them so that we bring them into this tax bracket and they help in building our economy? There are many SMEs which are 5 years old, 10 years old, and they are not within the tax bracket. So I would challenge our KRA and Treasury to look at, to think out of the box on what other ways do we have to raise revenue. And like I had said before, also on ceiling, on leakage of money that we have collected. Because that is the other thing that is affecting our budget. That if you look at what we have budgeted for, a good percentage is going to be wasted.
Yeah.
Not necessarily misappropriated, but wasted on expenses that do not make sense. I remember there was one time the government stopped meetings and things like that. I think when tough times comes, it calls for tough decisions. I think we have the budget have to be controlled. Some unnecessary expenses have to be stopped until we are able to stabilize our economy and be able to fund our budget without much ado.
Okay. Reginald, let me bring you in on a certain question that I'm getting here. So we are soon hitting the debt ceiling of about 9 trillion through the budget that is going to be read tomorrow. So what's the sustainable solution for the next government, since it appears that our budget will have deficits for the next few years? What's the sustainable solutions? And I'd like to hear about this from all of you.
Okay, just a side note, I think our members of parliament are not doing as a good service, especially the ones seated on the show who sit on these committees, because if they are speaking the way they are speaking, and this budget process started in July last year, and they have these figures in front of them, and they seem like they're interrogating them on a TV show instead of parliament, then I'm really worried. Because then some of these things, that's actually the role of parliament. When Treasury comes and brings, we're supposed to be asking ourselves, what do you want to achieve with this? How do you plan on raising this? Because the Constitution says the finance bill has to come before he reads it in parliament. That means so they know. Ideally, they should be knowing. If they don't, they should have refused for him to announce until they see how do you plan on financing this expenditure and what do you plan on achieving this expenditure, so that by the time the final draft of the budget policy statement is coming out, they have taken care of some of these things. They have tried to balance this thing, because Treasury does not just bulldoze. Parliament actually approves both expenditure, and in the process of approving expenditure, you're also approving how it is being financed.
Reginald?
I don't even know why anyone wants to be a president, because if you are going to sort out the deficit, the debt problem that we have, there is no other way apart from going to renegotiate. Because we cannot be spending 1.3, 1.4 trillion on debt. So ideally, the new government that has to come in has to sit with the people that have lent to us and renegotiate tenure. Try to make our loans longer, so spread them longer. If you're able to renegotiate interest rate, then you just have to renegotiate interest rate, so that every budget cycle, the impact of the previous debts, which I call odious debts, because we really don't know what happened with that money, can then have a lesser impact and therefore drastically reduce the deficit. The problem is not mostly even external debt, because our external debt is literally cheaper, because we borrow at 6%, 7%. Our local debt is actually the main headache, because we borrow locally at 14 to 15% in our own local currency, which again is another misnomer that we have in terms of our borrowing, because we're borrowing cheaper outside than we're borrowing locally. How they're going to handle the local borrowers has to be very delicate, because then the ripple effects might be dire. Considering most of your banks, the money is parked in government securities, pension funds, collective investments, they are all parked in government securities. So how are they going to lengthen that tenure and renegotiate interest rates locally to be able to spread and reduce the impact of that? Because when you see 867 billion in terms of what is to be paid, all of that is interest. It does not even take care of the principal payments that have to be paid. So that means our debt is expensive, number one. Two, the tenure of our debt is short. It has to be lengthened. So any government that is coming in, those are the two things that I'll try to look at. How do we renegotiate to lengthen the tenure? And if there is room for renegotiating of the interest rate, then they should do the same thing.
Okay. Kiru, what are the solutions? We're closer to the debt ceiling. What is the solution for the next government? Because it seems deficits will always be there now.
Yes, but for this 3.3 trillion budget, I am confident if we took some measures seriously, we may realize that we did not even need to spend 3.3 trillion to do all that we need to do. Number one, let us reappraise development projects. Reappraisal means we are going to look at what development projects do we want to do. on paper, how much are they costing? In reality, how much will they cost? Only the government procures a pen like this at 200 shillings. I will buy it at 10 shillings. I mean, okay, let me be realistic. I'll buy it at 20 shillings. Government will buy this pen at 100. Once in a while, I saw a business proposal for somebody doing business with government, and I saw them proposing to procure buckets at about 13,000 shillings, and eventually they got the contract. Let us be appraised and kick out that. That is budgeted corruption. Remove it. Or everything that's inflated, deal with that. That cost should go down. Secondly is, let us also look at the more scrutiny to the ministerial departments and agency budgets.
Yeah.
Do we really need this expenditure? Do we need these cars we are having? They are good. They are working very well. Now that I'm a new CS or I'm a new PA or something like that, why do I need a new car? Look at what is it that they are proposing to buy, kick out what is not necessary.
Okay.
Thirdly, don't forget about the public-private partnerships. Kenyans are not making so much noise about the expressway because they know how it has been funded. So those kind of partnerships whereby the private sector comes in to fund some of these development projects that we're thinking that only government can build roads. It's no longer only government who can do some of these things. Even the private sector can do them. Thirdly, other than give people jobs and you have no work for them, or just because they are your relatives and you promised them, or maybe it was your campaign pledge, you support me and I'll give you this when I get these. Other than do that, why don't we try and find ways of stimulating the private sector? I wonder why all these new beautiful markets were constructed and they're still not in use, and people are still selling wares along the streets. Why are we not using them?
Yeah.
Stimulate the private sector so that as government squeezes the budget like we are seeing, for example, the private sector is filling into the gap and is able to stimulate the economy so that as you sort out, we know, of course, economists foresaw this inflation. It did not hit us. What did we expect with all the COVID measures put in place? Okay. Increasing the money supply because of that is just lessening easing the fiscal controls to mitigate COVID. We saw that. Okay. At the end of it, we saw this inflation coming. I hope governments also saw it and had other plans to push, because now the next phase now is cleaning up this inflation. And cleaning up will need to work. I mean, tough measures now. Yeah. They have to do the opposite of what they were doing. Okay. And as they do that, they must be sure that the private sector is able to take care of Kenyans, that is able to stimulate enough jobs, is able to keep the economy running as they sort out this mess. Okay. And thirdly, I know that they are going to be rushing into increasing taxes, which must be done with caution, because if you increase taxes and the private sector, the MSCs are not strong enough, you're going to depress the same economy. Yeah. You can't milk a cow that no longer has any more milk to give. It will just die and the thing will become bad. So even as you go into that, you must be sure that the private sector is thriving enough so that as you tax people, yes, they can give you the money that you want. Okay. Otherwise, it will backfire. Okay.
Dr. Mulu, what are the solutions? You had mentioned it earlier on. The debt ceiling is fast approaching. So what are the solutions? Yeah, considering we still have the deficits anyway. Yeah,
before I get to that, let me assure our friend in UK that the things we are saying here, they are the same things we have said in the House. You can check the Hansard. Yeah. You see the Hansard will bear as witness, because the Hansard captures all what we say. So we are just not saying this because we are in this studio. We say these things daily. We say them anytime we get an opportunity to say them. Debt issues are tricky issues. I think most of the issues, what we need to do has been said by the scholars. But just one quick one, Trent. I think what we need, Trevor, is, to me, I think we need what I'll call a policy reorientation kind of. We need to look at our policies. For example, if you do a quick analysis, you realize that anytime agricultural sector has done well in this country, the economy has grown. Yeah. Very well. So there's actually a positive correlation between growth of agriculture sector and growth of the economy. That means if you are a serious policy maker, you need to push more resources to agriculture. But you know what has happened? Agriculture is devolved. And even as you analyze this budget at this level, you need to look at how much money out of the share which goes to the counties is pushed to agriculture. And you'll be surprised, Trevor, that it's not even a 0.1% what you go to agriculture. While we are saying agriculture is contributing to 25% of the GDP, so we should be pushing more resources. You go to the county level, you find they are not pushing even much money to the agriculture. Much money is going to recurrent. So this is what we are saying. We look a serious kind of analysis of our policies and push forward those policies which are going to make this economy grow. Because, you know, Trevor, the problem we're having is we are not growing the economy as it should be growing. If our economy was growing at a higher rate, every time we'll be reducing the need for borrowing because you're getting more resources. So even as we think about KRA and administrative issues being pushed so that we collect more revenue, even as we think about thinking about development projects, can we phase them out so that we do some this year, we do others as we move to the future, even as we do reappraise of the project so that we get those ones which are giving us huge returns as a country. All this is important, but the most important bit is come up with strategies which are going to make sure that we hit the 10% mark in terms of economic growth. If we sustain that for 5 years, 10 years, there will be no need of borrowing. We'll be able to provide all what our people need, and at the end of the day, we'll still be having what my friend in London is saying, a balanced budget, where you plan for what you are collecting and you have no reason to borrow. And we were actually almost there when Kibaki was the president. I remember one budget, I think that was just as he was leaving, we were only borrowing 5% of our total budget. The rest was being funded by Kenyans. We need to go back to that level.
But on this issue of the debt ceiling which we are approaching, what is the solution?
No, the solution is simple. We need the Treasury, the executive to come to Parliament and then bring a bill so that we change an amendment to the law so that it's readjusted. Otherwise, the law as it is now, you can't borrow more than 9 trillion.
Can our economy sustain it if we readjust it again?
You know, Trevor, we've said many times in this that borrowing is not bad. What matters is what Madam Kiru is saying. If you borrow and put it in the right place, actually the thinking is, Trevor, if I borrow today, in another 10 years, whatever we have put that money into should be able to generate even more money for the country than what we are paying. So over time, it's supposed to be, the development project which you have done should be able to repay that bill, that loan, and generate more money for the country so that we get more revenue. But what we are doing is we are borrowing, but where we are putting the money in terms of returns, then we are not getting the kind of returns we would expect as a country. And that's why the issue of reappraisal, issue of phasing out projects becomes critical. Yes.
Honorable Njomo, is that where the solution lies? Should the executive come back to Parliament again to readjust the debt ceiling even higher?
I think there are some things that we must do. We must increase our agricultural output so that we rely less on import on what we eat, which means we must invest more in our agriculture and in our irrigation, because we have been relying on the weather for too long. The time has come when we start mechanizing and also supporting our irrigation. And this will be best done by the people themselves. We saw what happened in Kararu, is called the one in
Galana
Koralu. You know, it's a very big project which was well thought out, but the implementation had a problem. But if we could invest this money in financing farmers who will be able to farm and repay those loans, this will help us in reducing our imports. And this is what I was saying. We must now start thinking out of the box. We must stop doing things the way they have been done. We need creative people in the ministry who will come up with proposals that are able to bring more into our coffers. We don't just ask people for tax. We help them to build that tax. Now, if we go to our, say, like our Juakari sector, how can we help those people in Kikomba to make better boxes, to do, you know, let us build them better workshops so that they are able to produce more. And now when they produce more, they pay more taxes. We must stop just taking tax from people. Can we help the people to create the tax, to make the taxes so that they can pay them back to the government? That way, I'll be a happier payer. because the same government have helped me to earn this tax.
Okay.
So I'll be too happy to go and pay it back to the government.
All right. Reginald, the legislators seem to be suggesting a further readjustment of the debt ceiling, considering the GDP ratio that we have right now. But the reality is there is a deficit of about more than 800 billion. There are only two ways of doing it, either by borrowing or increasing taxes.
And if we do not adjust the debt ceiling, then I think Treasury will have to think of ways of, one, making sure that the things they need to do fit in the budget. But the other problem that we normally have is we have a budget that is approved in June. Around September, October, you have supplementary 1, January supplementary 2. So there are things that they know actually that even in the budget, it's not even enough. They will come backdoor supplementary, which throws all these other equations out of the window. Increasing taxation, I don't think is the way. Increasing taxes is like trying to lift yourself from a bucket you are standing inside. I think that the other problem that we have in Kenya is that, one, the government has been involved in private sector in a big way, and they have to cut down their involvement in private business. So using an example of the Galana Lalu project, that was the government trying to enter private sector business in terms of food generation. Instead of the government, in the name of now development, if they want to real development, is how do we lay down irrigation infrastructure to the farms that are there to help, to help the farmers. That's incentivizing. How do we make our own fertilizer in country without the government having to set up the factory? How do you incentivize a Russian company or a Ukrainian company that makes fertilizer to come and set up Kenya and make fertilizer from the local products and ingredients? So the role of the government has to be thought out, especially the new government that is coming in. Let their role be the one of facilitating and incentivizing private sector to do things that private sector does best, and let their role shrink down to providing essential infrastructure. And keyword there is essential. That way you realize you don't have to increase taxes, but it's private sector that is coming to do the work. You don't have to borrow in the name of trying to do development. It's private sector that is looking for funding, which they will have done calculations that it's able to repay itself, who are doing this. The government now uses its fiscal policy, the ability to spend, the ability to tax, to incentivize where they want money to go or where they want things to be aimed at. But if we are going into this new year, yes, there's going to be a cry for the budget ceiling to go up, but I think the proposal from Treasury is actually to move away from a physical ceiling to back to a percentage of GDP, which is a smart way because you can always manipulate GDP, rebase it, and you're always safe in terms of debt to GDP. So I don't think Treasury are going to ask for the ceiling to go up. They're going to ask for a complete change from debt ceiling to a debt to GDP ratio measure, which is in line with what most countries in the world will do, which will just be a smart way of running away so that they're able to borrow more, manipulate GDP without having to go back to Parliament to ask to be able to borrow more. So yeah, I think that's the route Treasury is going to take, other than asking for an increase in the debt ceiling.
All right. Joy, as we wind up on this, the issue of multilateral and bilateral loans, what options does the government have? And I know Honorable Makali Mulu has to head out because you have another function, so we'll allow you to head out in just a bit. But you can give your closing remarks on that, really brief.
Yeah. I think
loans, what do they do?
I think, Trevor, even as we talk about tough times ahead, let's also give Kenyans hope that we can do things to make sure that they don't suffer more as we move to the next budget.
All right.
So I just want to encourage them so that we continue being hopeful.
Yeah.
But as leaders, we'll do our best to make sure that they don't suffer more.
All right.
Thank you.
As we allow Dr. Makali to head out because I know he has another function. Yes.
Thank you very much. Then the issue of debt, first, before I come to your other question. The truth is we cannot afford to increase the debt ceiling from an economics perspective. Okay. Because the relationship between debt and economic growth is not linear, as in it's not more debt, more growth. It's not like that. Okay. It is it's like this.
Yeah.
at certain levels of debt, the relationship between debt and economic growth is positive, it increases. And at a particular level, the relationship changes and it goes down, meaning that there's a tipping point for which debt stops being useful to the economy.
Yeah.
And what economists are saying to Kenyans, surely at 75% debt to GDP, the tipping point, we are already at the tipping point.
Yeah.
Any more debt can make the curve go down. And the indicators of the tipping point are what we are seeing now, that we cannot even run a salary budget, a recurrent budget. That now, as we are speaking, in the next government, the debt repayment budget will be higher than the recurrent budget. First time in the history of this country. If this is not the tipping point, what other signs are we waiting for to know that we are at the tipping point? We cannot accommodate any more debt, and any more of it will just. What would help this country are those measures that I outlined to make sure that the budget we have is even squeezed leaner by doing away with what we don't really need.
All right. Jomo? The issue of loans, how do you deal with it now going forward?
Well, I think loans, like we have said before, are necessary because really we cannot do development without borrowing. But we have to do prudent borrowing. And I think sometimes also as a country we promise more than we can deliver, especially when we are looking for votes.
Yeah.
And I think when the government sits down and settles down, I think it's good to ask ourselves, are these promises that we have done good for our country? For example, we are paying school fees for all our primary schools. Are we doing the right thing? To me, yes, that is the right thing. That is something we cannot do away with. We are also paying for secondary schools children. Is that right? Yes, that is right. We have to go down the list and ask ourselves, is there any areas where the government has committed itself where we can do without, or we can give that responsibility back to the people? Is there any way we can help the people to make more money? For example, and I was discussing this with, I'm a member of the Pan-African Parliament, so I meet with other African parliaments. One of the major differences between Kenya and Uganda, for example, is that many Ugandans depend on their local food. They eat cassavas, they eat matoke. We rely on maize and wheat. We cannot produce enough, so we have to import. So are there areas that we can be able to adjust so that we do not necessarily rely on what comes from the government? Those are areas that really we need to look at and to see how we can also cut down on our expenditure. It will be very, very dangerous when we are not able to pay our salaries and we are not able to service our debts. Those are things that we have to be very keen about.
All right, let me bring in the feedback really quick and then take 30 seconds closing remarks from all of you here. Let's bring them up on TV. That's at Trevor Mbiji at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Daybreak. Let's bring up what you're saying online, see what your remarks are in terms of the budget, which will be read out tomorrow, 3.31 trillion shillings budget. Chalu Wood Rosie says, Kenya should not expect anything good out of the budget that will be read tomorrow by the CS of Finance. We should all be ready for tough times ahead, and prices of some commodities may even increase. The economy is in bad state and it won't stabilize anytime soon, okay? LJ Sindani says the country has to collect enough taxes to pay for the increased external debt servicing and at the same time run the government. Taxes are therefore not just about to go down, okay? Amaganga Mustaf says, practically we have a three-tier budget: recurrent, development, and corruption. Recurrent and corruption is 80% of the budget. That is why we have personalized development to focus on civil servants and tenderpreneurs, okay? Engineer Lazaro says, 2010 Constitution handed Parliament more powers over budget making. Very unfortunate to watch some lawmakers asking Kenyans questions which are supposed to be directed at them. Saul Twiga says it's a big joke to compare our economy with other flourishing countries. Unless we change this kind of leadership that has been installed in our minds, we'll never progress. I think the best way is to reduce our leaders' salaries. To be honest, we are tired. Jima Felix says, I agree. We are living far beyond our means. Reginald, so should Kenyans just brace for tougher times ahead? 30 seconds.
Yes, if something drastic does not happen in the new regime, it's going to get tougher. We are past the tipping point. And if we do not take drastic measures, some of them might not be nice, then we will find ourselves in in a very precarious state going forward.
Okay.
And just again to repeat, we don't have a funding problem in the country. Our recurrent expenditure is actually not that much, by the way. It's around 526 billion, and we collect 2.3 trillion. Our huge elephant in the room for any coming government in August is the debt.
Okay. Honorable Jomo, closing remarks on this. Should we just brace for tougher times ahead?
We are already in tough times. And like everybody is saying, the earth is hard. We don't have to make it any harder. But I think there is light at the end of the tunnel. There are many measures that we can make that can help us reduce the burden that is on Mwananchi. Maybe we have to get a middle point between development and recurrent expenditure. Do we have to get all these projects that we want done? Can we reduce them so that the rate of development comes down as we wait for the economy to stabilize? For example, you remember when coffee was doing very well, the country was making quite some good money. Right now, the coffee prices are down. So sometimes we may have to weigh down on our development.
Yeah.
We scale down the projects that we need, and maybe do a bit of maintenance of our roads and other systems and on medical services. Scale down until the economy is revived, then we can resume development.
Okay.
But to me, I think though things are hard, they can become better if we reschedule some of those things.
Okay. Joy, are you as optimistic as Honorable Njomo, or should we just brace for tough times ahead?
We cannot afford to be any worse than we are now. It means that the country is like, if we get worse than we are now, the country bursts. There's no, I mean, and the leader will not be able to lead. So the point is, we can only get better, and that's even for the good of the leadership that's going to come. And that's the challenge we're throwing to the leader who is coming. When they come, they should forget all those things they said on the campaign trail. We know politicians have to do the political thing. It has to be done. But when you come to lead this country, we need a leader who can stand up to the challenges, and we need a leader who can lead this country to prosperity.
All right. Thank you so much for making time. There, Joy Kiru, lecturer and economist, also Dr. Reginald Kadzutu, CEO, Amana Capital, joining us online. Jude Njomo, member of Budget and Appropriations Committee and also MP for Kiambu, and also earlier on Dr. Makali Mulu, member of Budget and Appropriations Committee and MP Kitui Central, was with us here. And thank you all for listening in, and also the comments that you've sent through. We'll know when the rubber meets the road. It's happening tomorrow, the 3.3 trillion budget.